Godzilla the Godzilla is a 2014 film jointly produced between Warner Brothers and Legendary Pictures, the second fully American Godzilla film since the 1998 Sony TriStar film, and the first Godzilla movie made in 10 years since 2004's Godzilla Final Wars. It easily surpasses its American predecessor in terms of feedback, but reception hasn't necessarily been 100% positive. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that it was the bestest movie ever. We all know that honor belongs to Idlewild. But I don't know, I really like this picture. Hey, I hear you say, could it be that you just like this movie because it casts Godzilla in a positive, almost anti-hero-esque light, similar to one of your favorite nostalgic TV shows? Well, maybe. But I have other reasons. I just think it's cool that there's a major Hollywood blockbuster that puts a reptile creature as a positive force. When was the last time that happened? I guess? Plus, I kind of think that it's neat we have the big American family man soldier guy going through the entire film without firing a weapon. No, for real, check. Speaking of Ford, an interesting example of a white male lead who doesn't have a lot of impact on the overall plot. While the focus of the story is on him, he spends a lot of time reacting to things other people do or tell him, like his dad, Serizawa, Godzilla, the Mutos, etc. Now then again, the same can be said for a lot of protagonists in natural disaster films, and I also suspect this fact is what makes Ford so unlikable to a lot of people, which is fair, you don't have to like every character. But I actually think this way of writing him helps reinforce the themes and ideas the movie is trying to discuss. Scott Ashlin, in his review of Godzilla, had this to say: "The U.S. military interposes itself into an ancient conflict between combatants its leaders understand poorly, if at all, in response to a devastating attack by one of the antagonists on American soil. The best efforts of the most dedicated common soldier fail to resolve or even contain the battle, and ultimately make things significantly worse, partly because their commanders insist on a delusionally misguided strategy, and partly because high-tech firepower is simply the wrong tool for the job in the first place. Experts in the relevant field are sidelined, ignored, and even treated like criminals, while the authorities make bullets and bombs their first and only resort. And in the end, there is no practical solution but to get out of the way while the old enemies duke it out, even if getting out of the way means accepting the risk of becoming collateral casualties in the fight. Oh, and along the way, the expected smashing of famous skyscrapers comes packaged with the whole squadrons of airplanes falling out of the sky and exploding on impact against the crumbling concrete towers. Did Edwards and Borenstein deliberately set out to render 13 years worth of military, diplomatic, and foreign policy fiasco in the Middle East as a kaiju eiga, aka monster film? I don't know, but I do know that the atomic bomb is yesterday's nightmare, and that each era tends to get the monsters it needs in turn. But, you say, the real reason people don't like Ford is because he wasn't Bryan Cranston, and that's what everyone was expecting to see. And yeah, okay, that's fair too. Lord knows this film was marketed to appeal to his star power, and Lord knows lying to your audience through marketing only works like 5% of the time. But even if Joe Brody gets roughly the same amount of screen time Godzilla gets in this film, what if he was always with us in spirit? What I'm trying to say here is, I think maybe Godzilla is meant to be Bryan Cranston's character. Not that Joe was a Godzilla slider or something like that, heavens no. But more like Godzilla is a metaphor for Ford Brody dealing with the strained relationship he had with his father, and his father's subsequent death. It's like how in E.T. and the alien represents Elliot's daddy abandonment issues, and Spielberg's abandonment issues. For example, Godzilla doesn't appear until the story explicitly until after Joe's death. Ken Watanabe's character, Serizawa, was the first person to believe in and respect Joe's knowledge about the tremors, and is also the first to believe in Godzilla's ability to defeat the Muto pair, and champions Godzilla as the best solution. Godzilla doggedly pursues the Mutos, similar to Joe's own obsession with determining what went wrong at the power plant 15 years ago. Since it was technically the first Muto's arrival which killed Joe's wife and Ford's mother, perhaps this is an extended revenge. Consider also that the Mutos were discovered living parasitically off the skeleton of another Godzilla-like creature. What was this Godzilla's relationship to the one we see in the film? A parent? Maybe a mate? Like his wife? The military is distrustful of Godzilla and reacts violently when the lizard deviates from predicted travel patterns, similar to how Joe was repeatedly arrested and imprisoned for trespassing in the power plant earlier. Both characters have their movements heavily monitored under punishment, but both have their reasons for doing what they do. Godzilla keeps showing up at oddly opportune moments to protect either Ford, Ford's wife Ellie, or Ford's own son Sam. Note that in Act 1, both Ellie and Ford expressed interest in Joe moving back to America with them and being parts of their lives. There's a relationship arc parallel too. During Act 1, Ford reconciled with his father by acknowledging that Joe wasn't crazy. Similarly, Ford goes from viewing Godzilla as a monster to implicitly viewing him as an ally or brother in arms in Acts 2 and 3. There's a particularly poignant scene during the final showdown in San Francisco where Ford finally makes eye contact with Godzilla. Godzilla stares back with an oddly tired, pained, and human expression, not unlike the way a raving Joe was staring at Ford earlier in the film. And then Godzilla's head vanishes into the clouds of ash and dust in a decidedly ghostly way. Hey, wait a sec. Remember this scene from the beginning with Ford's mom? Maybe I've been thinking about this all wrong. Maybe Godzilla is a representation of his mom. Or both his parents at once. It's a possibility, right? Finally, Godzilla appears to die as Joe did, collapsing from fatigue and injury, but is revived when Ford finally reunites with his family. Now, you could go one step further into literal territory and say that Godzilla is possessed by the spirit of Joe Brody or something like that, but it might be going a bit too far. Basically, I think this is just a neat little metaphor layered into the film to make Godzilla and his actions more connected to the human protagonist. Now, you might say, this theory clashes with Godzilla 2014's explicit in-text theme as vocalized by Serizawa, that it is humanity's arrogance to presume it has control over the world and its future, and that's a good point. I suppose you could also say that the different readings about what Godzilla means and what his actions imply say a lot more about who's doing the interpretation, and also what character we consider more central to the narrative. Both Serizawa and Ford dealt with issues of loss and trauma within their lives. Serizawa lost his father in the Hiroshima bombs, just one of many thousands of people who lost family members in a similar way. It was a major event both in terms of world history and in Japanese history. It has left a permanent scar in the cultural landscape of Japan and the mentalities of its people. No doubt this has affected the way Serizawa sees the world. Serizawa looks up at Godzilla and sees a magnificent god who people cannot possibly hope to control or contain, and must be allowed to enact his will. He fights to retain his status as king of monsters, not out of a love for humanity, but merely because he is a predator staking a claim. Ford lost his dad in a sad, simple, pathetic way. It was highly personal. Ford looks up into the eyes of Godzilla and sees a tired hero with something to prove. Godzilla nearly dies, but unlike Joe, rises again and is hailed as a savior, the king of monsters. Unlike Joe, who departed with the world believing him to be a criminal and a madman, Godzilla receives respect and adulation. Ford couldn't apologize to his dad, or make the world see the truth. But you can apologize to Godzilla. You can let Godzilla rise again. And we can't neglect the fact that my background and expectations about themes payoff in Western cinema are coloring my interpretations of the film too. Like with anything, this is just a theory of mine. You don't have to agree with it, and you certainly don't have to agree with my opinion about the film. But at least I could give you something to think about. And that's really what I like about Godzilla 2014. It made me think. Yeah, Mutos probably won't ever show up and smash up the city. But, you know, earthquakes happen. People get lost. People get sick. Bombs get dropped. The people around you that you care about may not be here forever, and Godzilla probably won't show up to save you, or be someone you can apologize to. But you can make your peace now. Speaking of which, I guess I'd better start thinking about my next review. There's a bit of an East meets West motif going on with this movie, and if we stick to that theme, I've got an idea.